Hello there, welcome back to Ukrainian Media Podcast. I'm Olena Solodovnikova and I'm excited to be joined by Professor Andrzej Nowak, the famous Polish historian. Hello.
Hello, very nice to meet you and very nice to meet all your viewers.
Thanks a lot. If you don't mind, I would like to start with the results of presidential elections in Poland, but first to discuss their impact in a broader context than in domestic one. Do you agree that Karol Nawrocki victory in the Polish presidential election is a sign of the growing neoconservative revolution in the EU? Currently, the conservative axis of Europe includes Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Austria, Croatia, and probably Italy. Do you agree with this? Why is conservatism becoming so popular?
I think conservatism is a part of the issue. The other part is simply a very, I would say, a definitive position of ruling elites in the European center, that is in Brussels, Strasbourg, and the most important countries in Europe, as well as for example, so-called democratic elites in the United States, because the United States is a part of the same phenomenon. This attitude, which I am stressing as an important factor in the issue you are asking about, is simply a kind of deafness to the voice of the people. Simply, the elites do not want to listen what people want, and simply these elites want to install what they think is necessary. And this divergent paths between peoples, so to speak, and part of left liberal ideology motivated elites leads to a kind of confrontation between demos, that is people,
Yep.
and ruling elites that are more and more enervated by the fact that demos do not want to follow them. For example, Green Deal, which for many people means deterioration of their life. For the goal may be distant, but not very clear for everybody of saving planet. Yes, we agree that quite a lot of elements of ecological politics are very important, but such a radical plan that was so to speak, ordered by the European elites on all European countries, I mean all the EU countries, is one of the examples of this revolt. I would call it a revolt of the demos, a revolt of the people in many countries, and not just in Eastern Europe. If you look at the result of the elections in the Federal Republic of Germany with
Yeah.
AfD success, and a very definitive move of Christian Democratic ruling party from their pro-immigration platform to, well, much more, I would say, restricted tendency to this issue. Or if you look at France, or in the UK with Nigel Farage, you see all everywhere actually very similar tendencies. The issue of Green Deal, the issue of immigration, which arises a kind of fear of identity and of economic interests of different peoples. But also, and I think this is very important and somehow neglected in analysis problem, the fight for democracy, because the elites are more and more I would say, frustrated with democracy. They have a full mouth of this word of democracy, but they do not want to accept the result of democratic elections. They want to change them. They want to undermine them. They want to say that this is not good. We should somehow avoid the verdict of the people. And in Poland, it led to a, I would say, really monstrous dimension under the government of Mr. Donald Tusk, who simply wants to completely eliminate any opposition. First, by illegally taking financing, public financing from the main opposition party, which is simply horrible, and initiating a series of, I would say, legal issues through the fully controlled by his government, by his Minister of Justice, legal apparatus against different parties, which are described as extreme, fascist, undemocratic. I think the most undemocratic regime in Eastern Europe is exactly Mr. Donald Tusk regime, which is based on the support of some very influential interest of Germany, which supports exactly this very convenient government for German interest. And exactly by these liberal elites. So I think this is a big triumph of democracy in Poland, and every verdict of democracy should be accepted. And just one last comment, because it is very frequently used by the opponents of democracy, that it was the German people that elected democratically Adolf Hitler. It is, as I am saying as historian, it is complete false. Adolf Hitler did not win the elections that paved the way to his power. It was the letter of some 50-something members of the German elites that forced President Hindenburg against the results of the elections in 1932 to give power to Adolf Hitler. It is completely misrepresented history. So you better watch reality and stop from staying in your, I would say, ideological bubble. I'm not saying that to you, but to simply to those who believe in these myths that there are defenders of democracy who actually do not want any democratic verdict to accept.
Some remarks about your point. First of all, I do know that the green policies and shutdown of coal miners, for example, in Poland, it starts in 18th when Margaret Thatcher studies politics, and you approve it that time in Poland. But now that is you are regret about that. Yep, that is a short question.
No, this is not the main issue in Poland. Of course, there is still some problem with the existing coal mines. They are now much more ecological than they ever and safe than they ever have been. But they are not the key issue. The key issue is simply the perspective in which you could not buy a car because electric car is so expensive, and setting the concrete date, I think it is 2035, that you would not be allowed to have any other car but electric car, means that millions of people that used to have their individual mobile transport would have to resign. This is very simple perspective. This, I would say, type of Green Deal is good for extremely rich people, but leaves those lower middle class and poorer people with no perspectives of improvement of their own individual material status. So this is based rather on that than on, let's say, individual branch of industry protests.
Okay, but you talk about the advantages for domestic, and there are growing trend toward nationalism and European centrism in Poland. Does this represent a threat to European unity at all? Because all countries, and Poland especially, just wanted to do something for advantage of their people inside, not for all European Union.
I think the greatest danger for European unity is a change of that fundamental principle of European unity, that is diversity in unity, and not centralization. We entered the European Union 21 years ago, which was completely different from the one in which we exist now. Step by step, destroying the fundamental laws that organized the European Union, these especially green, liberal, and to a degree also so-called Christian democratic, which has nothing to do with Christianity and very little with democracy, main parties in the European Parliament simply try to take all power from individual countries and concentrate them in the so-called European Parliament, which is the least democratic institution in Europe. Why I'm saying that so definitely? Because if you elect your parliamentarian in Ukraine or in Poland, you can see your elected so to speak, representative, because you are relatively close to him or her. Strasbourg is as far, or Brussels, from the electorate as it is possible, or rather should not be possible. And these people, these elites there simply want to change the European Union from a system of individual countries with their individual interests, their individual cultures that are, so to speak, harmonized in an ever-going discussion between individual members of the Union, and want to centralize it in a system which directs from the center to all countries treated as peripheries, simply to accept dictate from the center. And this reminds us, who lived through the Soviet system very dangerously these old days. Of course, I see a very big difference between Soviet Union, which used open terror so brutally, and the European Union current tendency, which uses rather other methods. For example, taking money from European fund after COVID, given, for example, that should be given to Poland, it was used simply to eliminate previous government. It was so anti-democratic, as you can only imagine. The center of Europe wanted to influence the elections in Poland by simply saying, you would not get money, which we owe you, actually, because every country that accepted the plan for reconstruction Europe after COVID was to get a specific sum of money, some, I think, 100 billion euros for Poland it was. But the center in the EU said, no, until you would eliminate the ruling government through the elections, you would not be given money. So this has nothing to do with European values. This is anti-democratic.
Yeah, but fortunately, about the presidential elections in Poland, it was very close election. Half of Polish voters supported Navrotsky opponent, and the gap between candidates is minimal. Does this indicate a split in Polish society or not?
Oh, yes, of course. This split is as old, I would say, 18th century. It begins, I'm historian, so I see the beginnings of that split in times of the Enlightenment and in times of the partitions of Poland in 18th century. But speaking more seriously and in a more understandable way for the viewers, this split also has its roots in the communist times. But also, I would give you one example. The new government of Poland, in Poland, Daniel Tusk government, restored privileges for the former, our KGB, so to speak, officers that they were deprived of these privileges by the previous government. So this shows exactly the difference, and some roots stemming from the communist times. But more importantly, it is a very deep gap going through all the history of post-1989 Polish political scene. Actually, two symbols, two leaders of these opposition poles in Polish politics are still there. This is Jarosław Kaczyński, leader of the Law and Justice Party, and Donald Tusk, the favorite of Germany and favorite of European elites.
Could you talk a little bit more about the situation in the communistic time and after the Second World War, these parallels with split in society in Poland?
Simply, the difference revealed itself just after 1989 elections. I want to remind that these were elections in Poland after 44 years of communist regime that were, so to speak, negotiated in a so-called round table between the Communist Party rulers and representatives, selected representatives of the illegal at that time opposition. As a result, the first elections were half free, one can say, because simply the communist regime didn't want to make fully open space for the decision of the people. Yet it led to the beginning of the changes. And two different reactions for that situation were evident. One, we have to push for full freedom, resigning from any deals with the communist rulers because they were occupants and not democratically elected rulers. And the other side said, no, we have to keep our agreements from the round table. We should rather follow this path of, I would say, compromise with the previous system and logic of that compromise. Of course, there are arguments on both sides. I'm not saying that this is black and white difference, but simply it shows two very different tendencies. And finally, Law and Justice Party, which existed in under different names from the very beginning of that divide, that is from 1990 exactly. And on the other side, so-called Liberal Democratic Party, which also existed from the very beginning of that divide, with Donald Tusk as a leader, represent exactly these two diverging paths. Because in the beginning, some of the representatives of both parties were connected with solidarity movement. This is not the divide in which one side is, so to speak, represented only by former communists and the other one is represented only by, I would say, former Solidarity members. This is a divide in which one part is, so to speak, motivated to condemn fully communist past and to make lustration. This was a very divisive issue of lustration of the former agents, simply to reveal who served as an agent to the communist secret police. The side which wanted to follow this path of compromise with the past regime was vehemently against any lustration. And the other part was, of course, for lustration, which was, again, a very divisive issue. So this is not actually to say who was right, who was wrong. I am saying that these roots of the conflict, which is still there in Poland, are so closely related to PRL, that is, to this communist period in Polish history.
And back to the modern time, Polish constitution is restructured in such a way that there is essentially two poles of power in country, the presidential and prime minister. And now this is two poles under control of opposing political forces. Could this lead to a crisis when the president vetoes some parliamentary draw laws?
Actually, this is the picture that the current government wants to show, but as you know probably, current president in Poland is also from the opposite, so to speak. Andrzej Duda is exactly from the same side, which is represented by the newly elected Karol Nawrocki. So this is not any change in this, I would say, situation. And the real facts are as follows. Andrzej Duda vetoed 9 of 172, so to speak, not decrees, I forgot the English name, simply laws that were proposed by the parliament dominated by the currently ruling party of Donald Tusk. So it shows that vast absolute majority of government work is realized with the acceptance of the opposite president. And the same would be probably the case after the change on the presidential in the presidential palace, because this is not the change in the political situation in this respect that, once again, Karol Nawrocki follows Andrzej Duda in political terms. The difference is or stems from breaking the consensus in Polish foreign policy. This was for the first time introduced after 1991 by Donald Tusk government in 2007. This was the government who broke that consensus, which meant that for us, Ukraine and Lithuania are the most important eastern neighbors. Of course, Belarus also, but unfortunately, Belarus was, so to speak, taken over by the post-Soviet forces. And Donald Tusk decided to go for the reset with Vladimir Putin. He went for the first time not to Kiev, but to Moscow, to Vladimir Putin. And for the next 7 years, he engaged Poland in this very, I would say, fateful, dangerous, and fatal in results reset with Putin. So you can find a good illustration for that catastrophic tendency represented by Mr. Tusk government in a cover of an Ukrainian journal, Tydzień, from 2010. Nowy Warszawski Dogovor, this was the title, and a strong shake hand between Tusk and Putin. This was shocking for us, for me especially, because I am dealing all my professional life with Russia, and I see and try to vocal the dangers stemming from Russian imperialism. So I saw how detrimental was this reset, serving only Vladimir Putin goals to blackmail Ukraine and then to attack Ukraine. Of course, after 2022, Donald Tusk re-entering on the Polish scene could not follow this path of reset with Russia, because he follows every time Germany line, Germany in the I would say, ruled by Chancellor Merkel, pre-2014 change, tried to exploit as much as possible every line of collaboration with Putin's Russia to satisfy economic needs of German industry. So that's how Donald Tusk tried to also to follow that line, to a detriment of Polish and all Eastern European interest. So now I simply do not believe in any word of Donald Tusk, I would say, anti-Russian stand, because it simply is a continuation of an actual line of German policy, not taking seriously any, I would say, Eastern European experiences with Russian imperialism, and unfortunately not so infrequent examples of recurring German-Russian collaboration to the detriment of all smaller nations in our region. And this is my fear, that such a reset between Germany and Russia is on the horizon, not this year, not the next year, but I am sure that German industrial and to a degree political elites are hoping very much for a soon restoration of the best neighborhood relations, not with Ukraine, not with Poland, but with Russia, at the coast of Poland, at the coast of Ukraine.
That is awful, but could you explain that during his campaign, Karol Nawrocki said he wouldn't support Ukraine joining NATO. They met someone other in the Ukrainian statements. And you were the leader of the public committee for the support of Navrotsky, and you are a big fan of Ukraine joining NATO. So what official position should Ukraine expect from Poland on this issue?
I think you should, or we should come back to the beginning of our conversation. Democracy means that you have to, at least a large degree, follow what demos says. And the change of attitude in Poland, unfortunately, I very much regret that, is towards a kind of weariness with the help not for Ukraine in military terms, but for these, I would say, 2 million or something Ukrainians in Poland. So this is the reaction, a kind of populist reaction by the people in Poland. That's why, if not anti-Ukrainian, that at least less enthusiastic towards Ukraine attitudes prevail now among ordinary Poles. Once again, and I regret that very much, but this is fact. And that's why not only Karol Nawrocki, but every candidate in the last election presented this, I would say, attitude that we should somehow change our relations with Ukraine on a strictly pragmatic basis. That is, do ut des. We will give you all support as regards our military logistic infrastructure, but another issue is simply that Polish people are afraid of being engaged in war, so to speak, in a near future. And that's why most of Polish people do not want engagement of Polish forces, even as peacekeeping forces on the border between Russian and Ukrainian positions. But the most important issue is simply that joining NATO at this particular moment is fundamentally impossible for Ukraine, as long as Ukraine is engaged in war. Ukraine has to win the war first, because as you know, and probably all Ukrainians know, you can't be a member of NATO, become member of NATO, if you are in a state of war. Simply you have to stop the war, and from my perspective, you have to win the war, because this is the only way of stopping that war acceptable for me, and I think also for most of Ukrainians, and I hope also still for most of Poles. So you could read, for example, yesterday's tweet of President-elect Navrotsky to President Volodymyr Zelensky. In that tweet, you see exactly that support for Ukrainian fight for final victory, support which will be expressed, I'm sure, in material terms, I mean military terms. But at the same time, Navrotsky, simply just like other representatives of Polish political society, has to respect the will of Polish people.
Yes, I do understand by my remark that why Polish people don't afraid to be involved in the war like the victim of the Russia, because you know the threat about that Russia could continue to keep on the war in Baltic states, in Moldova, or in Poland. That is different, and we know Suwalki and different ways here. So that is on the remark. And I just wanted to ask you about the democracy. Sorry for this question, but I'm astonished to know that well-known president from Gdansk too, like Navrotsky, Lech Wałęsa, spoke very aggressively about Navrotsky victory. And his quote, "Democracy in Poland collapsed on June 2040, not because there are free elections, not because of society, the right-wing conservative views. Democracy is based on values such as honesty, trust, dynasty, and respect." And he said that I'm going into internal exile, into the world of nature, music, and books. What caused Wałęsa to react this way?
Actually, the post-solidarity history of Lech Wałęsa is a very sad one. Maybe you forgot, but he decided to be bought by Declan Gunley some 15 years ago. This was a billionaire from Ireland who organized a campaign to destroy the European Union. And he simply bought Lech Wałęsa to be the face of this campaign, to destroy the European Union just for money. So this shows simply how sad is the story of Lech Wałęsa, but its main motivation is exactly the one which I described before. That is the fact that he collaborated, unfortunately, with the secret police and denounced his colleagues from early Solidarity or pre-Solidarity opposition in the early 70s, which was, I would say, not that condemnable because he was a young worker terrorized by the police. That's why he subscribed to this role of secret agent. But the moment when it was revealed during his presidency in Poland, he simply denied that. And from that moment, he became a radical opponent of any party that simply wants this fact to be accepted as a fact. All historians in Poland, absolutely all historians in Poland, agreed finally that Lech Wałęsa collaborated with this secret communist police in early 70s. I'm not saying about 1980, but in early 70s. And Lech Wałęsa do not want to accept this fact, and that's why he fights so hysterically against the party which stands on the platform that the truth about communist times should be revealed. Unfortunately, this spoils his image as the true leader. I accept the fact that he was the true leader, not one, but one of several important leaders of the Solidarity movement. Another aspect of his position is simply his impossibly great ego, which tried to eliminate other heroes of solidarity, such as Anna Walentynovich, the real hero woman, who was the main issue of the solidarity birth in Gdańsk. Wałęsa so much persecuted her, tried to eliminate her, to be only the one symbol. And he managed to do this. In the world, he is seen as the only symbol of solidarity. But this is very unfair, and it shows something about his, I would say, specific attitudes and not something about Polish history.
Okay, this is interesting moment because in our Ukrainian society, he is a hero, still hero who supports Ukraine. Thank you for elaborating on that. Probably one of the last question, what are the advantages of Navrotsky being the head of National Memory Institute? Will he use his historical experience in big politics?
Karol Nawrocki is, as you maybe know, the only Polish politician who is on the list of Putin's persecution list, so to speak, to be taken into prison whenever he visits Russia.
Yeah.
So this shows something about his attitude to Russia and attitude of Russia to him. So it would not be easy to somehow change relations between Poland and Russia in a dangerous direction, which I described before, which was taken by Donald Tusk in 2007. So I think knowledge of history, Karol Nawrocki is Doctor of History from Gdańsk University, and I would say authentic belief of the importance of history in forming our identity and our political experiences, that Russia and Russian imperialism is the most important danger to us and our neighbors for Eastern Europe, is the key element of, I would say, world political outlook of Karol Nawrocki. Another element which is also important and which is to a degree undermined by the current government is the fact that Polish-American relations were historically the most important and the most positive for Poland. The effort of current government in Poland to show America as a kind of the great danger and the greatest enemy of Poland, which is simply ridiculous, to put Donald Trump on the same level as Vladimir Putin. But this is exactly the propaganda logic of important European liberal media and also Donald Tusk government. Is a very dangerous tendency, because America and America's place in NATO is the only guarantee of our safety and the only guarantee, I would say, of Ukrainian victory. Of course, the main guarantee of Ukrainian victory is heroism of Ukrainian people and soldiers, but without support of America, it would be rather difficult to believe that heroism alone would save Eastern Europe. So that's why I think these two elements, experience of Russian imperialism, so deeply ingrained in our history, and belief in importance of Euro-Atlantic relations, is form two most important pillars of Karol Nawrocki perspective on our foreign policy, on our, I would say, place in Eastern Europe, and also his knowledge that Ukraine is our most important strategic partner. But as a chief of Institute of National Remembrance, he also followed the issue which is important to a large part of Polish people. This is simply memory of the victims of the Volhynia massacre. And not only memory, but a simple gesture on the Ukrainian side to allow exhumation of these victims and to organize their proper, I would say, ceremony of burial. This is also maybe a divisive issue between Poland and Ukraine, but we are not here to hide any difficulties. And this is, I believe, the only element that stays on the agenda of the issues to be solved between Poland and Ukraine, which stem exactly from this historical perspective of Karol Nawrocki.
But is it really worth bringing up this controversial and triggering issue during the full-scale war in Ukraine? In fact, I personally don't feel very comfortable when I come to Poland and see huge monuments to the Volhyn massacre topic while waiting for a train connection in Przemysl, for example, or piles of magazines with covers of it that Ukrainians massacre and so on. Do you think that this subconsciously instills against modern Ukrainians among the Poles?
Yes, I am very sad about that issue, but the only way to eliminate this issue is simply to allow, I would say, decent burial of these victims, not to speak about that issue anymore. And we don't understand why Ukrainian government so long tried to deter that particular solution. This is not about any, I would say, compensation or this kind of things, simply to burial victims. And I think this is not a big issue. It should be buried, exactly. I'm saying it should be buried finally and for all. I agree completely with you that this issue is far less important in practical terms than contemporary strategic collaboration between Poland and Ukraine. And I believe that in this respect, President Navrotsky would exactly follow the lines of the great president Lech Kaczyński.